Hi, welcome to the Tandem Author Interview Series. My name is Dwynn, and I'm really excited to be here today with Angela Dalton, the author of If You Look Up to the Sky.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you. Hi.
So let's get right into it. So I'd love to know, what inspired you to become a writer?
Oh, wow. I, I started writing at a really young age. I loved reading, first of all. Like, I lived in the library. Like, every few summers I would have to go to my grandmother's house, and that's where I went to go hide because family. And and I loved to read, and I kind of, I kind of got into a higher reading level because I didn't have any really adult supervision. And so I started reading things like Stephen King and Toni Morrison and Maya Angelou and probably all of these authors that I should not have been reading at that age group. But I think what it did for me was, especially reading, Alice Walker, Toni Morrison, was, and obviously Maya Angelou, was getting that introduction into, hey, you can write your story, you can put words together and, tell your story, and people will be interested in it, inspired by it. So I definitely think reading was what kind of drove me to, down the path of writing. I also moved around a lot as a kid. My father worked for the government. I was a government brat. So, it was always just kind of like this Groundhog Day of like moving to a new city and trying to figure out how to meet new friends and how to be adaptable. And especially, as a black kid in like the 80s, it was like really, it was really hard to find your identity, especially moving around that much. So writing also was just a way for me to have an escape, create my own world, the times that when it did get to be a little bit lonely, like, you could just kind of go off, I could go off into a whole other world. When we did settle down at long places and I was able to develop a lot of friends in community, I was also a very bossy child, so I really liked putting together plays, and I was the director, and I wrote the plays, and I told people what to do, and people fell in line with it, and I was like, okay. So I think it was a culmination of just really liking storytelling and understanding what it was at a really young age through reading.
Right. Do you remember, like, at what age you first started writing?
7 or 8. I had a book of plays, plays for kids, and that's where I first started like finding my own sense of like voice and what we call bossiness, but bossiness is a good thing, especially for girls. And so after organizing the neighborhood kids and doing a couple of these plays, I realized I didn't really like their plays, so then I was going to write my own plays. So it was, probably like around 7, 8, 9, around there.
Cool.
Yeah.
And I'd love to know, what inspired you to write this book in particular?
Well, it's at its core, it was inspired by my great-grandmother, and something that she had actually once told me when I was a very, very little girl, which was, Angela, if you ever feel lost, just look up to the sky, and if you see the moon peeking ever so slightly through the clouds, just know you're exactly where you're supposed to be, and you're okay. And I remember that, affecting me twofold. One was just, understanding that, like, family, especially that connection with her, like, I was always going to be okay.
Right.
The second was that it forced me to look up to the sky.
Right.
And I started to become really interested in like the stars and the universe and stardust and the sun and planets and astronomy. I started watching Cosmo. I like had this like secret crush on Carl Sagan. Like, that's the first time I've ever said that in public, but I did. But I loved it so much. And my dad would take me. We lived in Chicago at the time, and my father would take me to the planetarium. And the Chicago Planetarium is like, it's so cool. It's especially as a little kid. And so my dad was so excited that I was just involved. Like, I was excited about anything with science. My dad was very much like a gadget guy. Like, we always had like the new stuff in the neighborhood, right? Like, I had a Texas Instrument computer. That's like really dating myself. We had the first microwave oven. We had like a big screen TV. Like, he was super into gadgets. He was super into science and technology, which really like formed my life, and I'm so appreciative now. But, you know, he was so excited that I was interested in astronomy that he definitely cultivated it. So he would take me to the planetarium 4 times a year so that we would see the changing of the solar system every season, so I could understand like how the world works, how like the revolving around the sun works. Right. There we go. So that is like what inspired me to do it, was my grandmother, and then just having this love of like that connection to the sky. And I just always felt like it was just a very comforting a connection to have. So I wanted to share that with children, but especially for girls of color. I think, you know, Angie Thomas just was in town in Oakland talking the other day, and she said something that I had been trying to articulate for so long about this book and why I thought it was important for girls of color, and it was perfect. And what she said was, you know, there are books out there for Black girls, but it's either about them being too much or not enough and nothing in between. And that just really struck me. And so that was another source of inspiration of having this book for all the Black girls that need to see them being in between. Right. And so, yeah, so that was the inspiration.
Right. That's absolutely lovely. And I'd read on, I believe on your Kickstarter, about this being inspired, at least in part, by your great-grandmother. And I'd love to know if you have a favorite memory of her that you'd like to share.
Well, I would say that's probably, so like our relationship unfortunately wasn't too long, because she died at the age of 97, I believe. And I think when this particular memory was probably like 5 or 6. Right. And that was my favorite memory. She had quirky memories too, because I mean, she was 95 years old. So like she would say things like, one of my favorite memories was, she lived in a nursing home, but my grandparents, she was my grandfather's mother, he would go and get her every day and bring her to their house, so she, you know, would be around family. And so my grandmother would have these pinwheel cookies, and also those cookies, I don't know if you remember, like in that big blue tin, and there's like 12 of them. So I would spend time with my great-grandmother keeping her company, and all we do is eat cookies. And she would always say, Angela, your teeth are like diamonds. Don't use your teeth. Use your gums to eat your food. And I'm like, whoa, like that's just weird. I think we need to workshop that one. But I'll take the moon one. Like that makes sense. I like that one. But, you know, she just had like her own, you know, Grandma Bradyisms, like things like that, you know, where she was very protective, and she like had a wealth of wisdom, and she was trying to to share it and expose me to it in some way, shape, or form. So it's always like these little cool colloquialisms and stories and stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good one.
Yeah.
I'm going to start telling everybody that. Your teeth are like diamonds.
It's not a real thing. Like brush your teeth and floss, but they're there for a reason.
So for you, what was the hardest part of creating this book?
You know, I went into it so naively. I had no idea what I was doing. I think one of a few things that just aligned for me was connecting with Beaver's Pond Press in Minneapolis. They're a publishing company that helps authors self-publish, and having their guidance and having their support. And they were also, the team was so excited about the story. And I, you know, like when you create something, of course it's special to you, but you just don't really understand how externally, you know, it's going to do. And I just went into it so naively, so I didn't really have a lot of expectations. I think the greatest fear that I had was that I was going to print all these books and they'd be sitting in my garage. But I feel like I had such a great support system with Beaver's Pond. My illustrator, Margarita Sokorskaya, she was incredible to work with. It's really interesting because she's a freelance illustrator through Beaver's Pond, so they have a portfolio, and I went through the portfolio and I saw her illustration, her work, and right away I was just like, yep, she's the one. Like there was just no question in my mind. But unfortunately, at the time when I was looking to hire an illustrator, she was really busy because she's really good, and everybody wanted to work with her. And so I was just like, you know what, I have no deadline, there's nothing really pushing me, I can wait. So I ended up waiting for her until she was able to, have the time and the availability. And our first phone call that we had, kickoff meeting, I said, I'm really glad that you're interested in this. And she's like, well, let me tell you the reasons why I'm like this. She's like, it reminds me of my grandmother. I'm from St. Petersburg, Russia. She's like, I connected on so many things about that relationship between the child and a grandparent, and then also that distance, having moved to America. And just the way she spoke about it, I was just like, you get it, you understand it. And the other part of that was towards the end of that phone call, she said, Angela, you and I have met before. And I was like, what? And she's like, yeah, like 15 years ago, you were at a party of this woman in Minneapolis. And I was like, yeah. She's like, yeah, I was there too. And I was like, oh, okay. And I got off the phone and I texted the woman who she was referring to. And I said, was Margarita at this party, at these parties? And she's like, yes, Angela. And she literally sent me pictures, and there's Margarita and me. And I'm like, oh my God, I had no idea. So I feel like it was also like kismet.
Right.
Because just the fact, like, I had lived in Minneapolis. I left Minneapolis about 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago. I started the book when we moved to Oakland. My husband and I moved to Oakland. And, found out that she and my editor, like, we all literally lived within 1 block radius of each other for 7 years and never met. Well, I knew the editor. I take that back. I knew the editor, but I remember seeing Margarita walk down the neighborhood with her son when we had these conversations. But so we had this weird bond as 3 women working on this book together that I think that really enhanced the fact that this was a book that primarily is for girls, which I was really excited about.
Awesome. And actually, since we just touched on the illustrations, people at home, this is a truly beautiful book. I mean, obviously the words, but also while we're talking about the illustrations, I mean, there are some really fantastic ones. I'm going to try and find my favorite real quick.
Yeah, what is your favorite? I'm always excited to know people's favorite.
This one is so beautiful. Let's see if we can see it a little better on the screen. Yeah, this is a gorgeous, I mean, just the way that it lights up her face, it's just so beautiful.
That was actually the first illustration that Margarita had completely drawn out, done color to, and sent it to me. And I was working with a friend of mine in a co-working spot at, it's like a Microsoft reactor. Right. So it's like a bunch of like tech people, and it's really quiet. And I opened up the file and I stood up and I yelled and I cried and I was so embarrassed because it was like all of these Silicon Valley types are just like, what is she need help? Like, is she okay? And I was like, it's so beautiful. So I that is one of my favorites because it was the first one where it was like, oh, this is actually starting to come to life.
Yeah. I mean, it's a magical drawing. Yeah. It's really beautiful.
Margarita, she was so great. Like I said, I can't say enough great things about her. She, aside from children's book illustrations, she's also a fantastic fine artist, right. Doing portraitures and things. And she's just, her work is mind-blowing. So if you have a chance, go look her up online because she's great.
Cool. And so I'm wondering, what was your favorite part of creating this book then?
My favorite part of creating this book was, sorry. My favorite part was, so there was a moment during the process of putting the book together that we ran into a hiccup, and a lot of it was just with the production of putting the type on top of the illustrations and how it worked. And my husband really came to save the day. Like, he saved this book. And so I think it's, also that added part where it's like he and I did it together. We worked on it together. And so I just feel like really blessed and honored that he could be a part of it, and it's something that we could share. And that's not just I did this thing, it's we did this thing, where it started out of I'm doing this thing. And so I don't know, it just holds like just even more, that much more value to me, is that it was a shared experience.
That's lovely. So a lot of this book really centers around the relationship between a grandmother and her grandchild. And what do you think makes that relationship between a grandparent and their grandchild so special and so important?
That's a great question. I think it's because, again, and this is fully my opinion, but I think it's because the child and the grandparent have so much patience for each other that the parent just really don't have at that moment. Meaning the parent is out, working a job, paying bills, transporting to piano recitals or soccer, and they're just in a very like reactive mode, right? And I think it's because the grandparents they've had some distance from parenthood. It's not necessarily their child, but it is a child obviously that means very much to them, and they have the time to spend with the child. They have the time to share those stories, to connect. And the child is at that point where they're looking for, like the whole world is a new wonder, and they're looking for information. They're craving information. They're especially looking for information about who they are and who their identity is. And I think the grandparent is really able to fill in some of those holes and gaps of their identity that a parent, you just really don't have the time to think about. And so I think that's what makes it so special. And I think that's always why, too, like, it's always the grandparents and the grandchild against the parent, because they do have that special bond. So, yeah, I think grandparents just play such a formidable role in, like, who you are and the things that you're interested in. Yeah, like my grandmother, she was a great cook, and she loved to make sweets, and she loved to make cookies and things like that. And those are the things that I think about with my grandmother. Is I always associate cooking and food and events and family and togetherness, because that was kind of her role and what she loved to do. But it also was just, she just loved to talk and tell stories as well. So she and my grandfather are like, when I think about the best storytellers in the world, it's them.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely. So your book, it features the main character is a young black girl and her grandmother. And I know I read on your Kickstarter a little bit about the value of diversity and that you feel as in children. What you feel the value of diversity is in children's books. So could you speak a little bit to that, like why you feel having diverse books and black girls and as the leads of books, why is that important to you and in general?
Absolutely. Excuse me. So, okay, so I can answer this question twofold. So going back to what Angie Thomas said, and about how, there are books out there for girls of color, but they tend to focus on them, again, being too much or not enough. And so I think it's really important for girls to see books where they're just being and they're just living and they're just part of the world, and they're not expected to act a certain way, to say certain things, to share this weight of defining who they are. And that's what I was really excited about when I finally saw the finished story and the illustrations come together in this final book, is because every scene in there is just a black girl being in the world. She's out, in the Grand Canyon. She's canoeing on a pond. I grew up mostly in Minnesota, even though I traveled around a lot, so land of 10,000 lakes. I know what it's like to go on a canoe ride, or get on the boat or be at a beach. And sometimes I'll read the book to kids in schools, and girls, especially black girls, are like, you can do that? It's like, yeah, you can. There's a whole world out there. You can do whatever you want to. So I think that aspect of having girls see themselves in a place that's like not just inner city and not just in certain particular environments that I think are stereotypical and traditional for telling their story in, was really important. Also, so then more on like a technical level, in 2017 there were 3,800 children's books that were published. Out of that, only 615 were for diverse, that were around diverse or for kids of color. Out of that 615 books, only 6%, and when I say 615 books, I mean African American, Latina, Native, Indigenous communities. So that's all grouped together. Right. And then out of those 615, only 6% of those were actually written by authors of color. And so I think, again, there's a need for kids not only to see pictures of themselves or see themselves in stories, I think it's important for them to see that people who look like them are telling their story. And so that was also really important to me, and why I think it's important to have diversity in books and to have, a black girl on the cover, but also a black girl on the jacket,
right.
or a black boy on the jacket,
right.
or a black boy on the front, because there's not enough of them. There are some. And I think that's sometimes a cop-out, is like, well, there are some, but it's like...
There could be more.
There could be more.
Yeah.
There's more pieces of the pie that could be shared. So I think that was like really, really important to me to be able to do that. And I think the other thing that people need to take into consideration is that when you talk about diversity, it's not just filling that well for kids of color. It's also filling that well for kids of non-color. I think it's a very dangerous world if you aren't exposing kids of non-color to books about kids of color. There's a danger of ethnocentricity and thinking that evaluating your world only based on the world that you know. A lot of independent booksellers this past year began talking about diverse books as windows or mirrors, which I love so much. So like a book being either a mirror, a reflection of who you are in your world, or a mirror into somebody else's world, so that right. you can understand like the vastness of like everybody being together and how we all are connected together. So that is like why I feel like diversity is still something that we need to continue to talk about. There's a lot of work that we still need to do. And there's a lot of room for everybody to play. There's a lot of paper. There's a lot of people. we can all work together.
A lot of books still to be made.
A lot of books, lots of stories still to be told.
Yeah. So what do you think the value of storytelling is with young children in particular? And either in like a book form or a grandparent sharing a story, something like that. It doesn't necessarily just be a book, but it could be anything. Family sharing stories.
Absolutely. Again, I think it comes down to that sense of identity, of that sense of not only who you are, but what you want to become. Mm-hmm. And I really believe that can really only be told through stories.
Right.
I think that storytelling also, again, it helps you to connect to other people, to understand that we all have shared experiences, and hopefully to give us all a little bit more humility in the fact of, yes, history has not been kind to a lot of us, but instead of being like, well, what about my story, talking more about what is our story and how can we make the future a better story for all of us, versus just compartmentalizing all of the horrors that have happened. Mm-hmm. We shouldn't negate them, and we shouldn't forget them, and we shouldn't sweep them under the carpet by any means of the situation. But I think it's collectively understanding of what everybody's gone through. Mm-hmm. And I feel like storytelling helps to build that foundation.
Yeah, I agree. And then how do you when you're telling a story, how do you make it powerful? What makes it a powerful story? Is there a list of elements that we could meet?
It's hard because again, everybody's experiences are different.
Right.
So you never know what somebody's going to connect with.
Right.
I think what makes a story powerful, but I don't think it's something, you have to just tell your own story and then put it out into the world.
Right.
And inevitably you're going to find people who've had a similar experience that are going to connect to it and really hold on to it and love it. So I think it's just more about like writing from the heart your story or what it is that you're trying to convey, and then build it and they will come.
Yeah.
Or they will read.
What advice would you give to young children who see what you're doing and say, I want to do it too?
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm just going to answer it honestly. I might get a lot of pushback on this. But so I would say definitely follow your heart, follow your gut, no matter what anybody tells you. Because there's going to be so many people in the world who at every step of the way, no matter how old you are, no matter how many degrees you have, no matter how many books you write, you're always going to have people who are going to tell you can't do something or that what you're doing isn't right. And so you absolutely have to 100% be grounded in the fact of it doesn't matter what anybody says, this is what you want to do, this is what you want to write, and this is how you want to write it. And the reason why I laugh is because this last year I struggled a little bit because my son has been trying to figure out, he's 20, and he's been trying to figure out what he wants to do. And he
Right.
finally landed on he wants to go to music production school. And he's a really good writer. And so, like, you know, that mom and
Right.
writer part of me was like, what? And I was listening to a podcast, and it was Spike Lee was being interviewed. And he said the thing that was just, like, the turning point for me, which was the biggest killer of kids' dreams, of anybody's dreams, are their parents. And I wanted to go to school to be a creative writer, and my dad was like, I am not paying that much money for you to be a starving artist. So I went into advertising because that was the closest thing that I could figure into the business and writing and making money. And you know, that really, when I heard that, like, it really hit me hard. And so that's where, like, telling kids, like, to really find their sense of strength and to hold on to it is so important, because even your parents have the ability to kind of derail you into doing something you don't want to do. And if that's not your truth, and if that's not who you are, you're going to be miserable.
Right.
And so, yeah, so I think it's really important for kids to just find their core and stick with it. And it's not
Right.
easy. It's easier said than done. But I hope if they can hear it enough and hear it over and over again, that they'll understand that it's important and valuable for them.
Do you have advice then for parents whose kids want to do something that they're like, oh no, that's not what I wanted? Do you have any advice for those parents? Since you're going to do something right now.
You just have to bite your tongue. You have to take yourself back to the point where you had this little child, this little baby sitting in your arm who is so helpless and depending on you. And you spent, let's say, 18 years helping them form into a good human being, helping them to be smart, helping them to be healthy. You did that for 18 years. And your hope, like what every parent says, is I just want them to be happy and healthy. So if they're happy and healthy, then let them go and do what they need to do. And you're going to hate it, and it's going to hurt, and you're going to be scared, and because you're like, anything could happen. They might be in my basement for like 12 years. That might happen, but you have to believe in your child. You have to. Otherwise, you have no business having a child if you don't believe in who they're going to be and you don't support who they're going to be. And most likely, they're not going to do the thing that you want them to do, but they will be the person that you want them to become.
That's lovely. And then one more advice-related question.
Yeah.
What is the best piece of advice that you got while you were writing this book?
Or
when you were thinking about writing this book, even?
The best piece of advice that I received was from Lily Coyle, who is my publisher, editor. And that advice was buckle down, move forward, believe in what you did, repeat. And, you know, and that was really the best advice, because once the book was done and getting it out into the world, you know, self-publishing, it's really freeing, but it's also very difficult. It has a stigma. I think that's changing ever so slightly year after year, but it is hard when you go into a bookstore and if you say the first thing about your book is that it's self-published, right away there's a wall, there's a shutdown. And so I had to learn, like, to show the book first and then to talk about it, to be able to have that conversation. But I definitely had to develop I had to buckle down and develop a thick skin and really believe in my product, really believe in my book, really believe in my story, and really believe in myself. So even when I got those no's or don't want it, you know, or not, it's not for us, I could still continue on. And there were more yeses than there were no's, like, the longer that I kept on going.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're pretty much at the end here, but I do have one more question. We like to end all of our interviews like this because at Tandem, we are the book people, and obviously we have a lot of books.
You have a great collection of books.
And we always like to ask authors that we have here, what is your favorite children's book? And if you can't pick just one, like a couple is fine. Or like an incomplete list is okay. It's hard to pick just one.
Does it have to be future, or like...
Anytime. You could just pick a couple that you really love right now.
Okay, one that I really love right now is Mooncake for Little Star. Such a great book, such a great concept in terms of teaching kids about the moon phases, and it's just gorgeous and sweet, and I love it so much.
I actually just read that and vetted it for our collection, I think, like last week. It's super beautiful,
story.
And the illustrations are gorgeous.
Right? Yes, they are.
Yeah,
definitely. And then I think my favorite book as a child, again, like I was reading books that I probably shouldn't have been reading. But I mean, Maya Angelou, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings was just, it was groundbreaking for me. It was to hear the voice of another Black girl was just, and to have her be real, this
Right.
real person, was just so formidable for me growing up.
A good pick too. I can't go wrong. Well, that's pretty much all we have time for today. But before we go, where can people find you online if they want to hear about what you're doing, learn more about what you have going on?
Absolutely. Well, AngelaDalton.com is my website. I'm also on Instagram as Angela Dalton _author. So please come visit me there. I also write book reviews for Multiculturalism Rocks, which is really fun. And then you can buy the book online. I really like to support my independent booksellers. So indiebound.org has it, and also itascabooks.com carries it as well. They're my fulfillment company. So, but you can always, if you want a signed copy, you can always contact me through my website.
Awesome. And if you can't get enough of Angela, of course we can't, you should come to our gala because she will be one of our special featured guests next month.
Yes.
And that's going to be a real treat. We're very excited to have you there.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited. Yeah. It sounds like, it looks like a wonderful event. The pictures from the last 2 years looks like it was really fun. Yeah. So I'm excited.
So it's a pretty good time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So please join us at our gala to meet Angela in person. And for everybody who's watching online, either right now when it's live or later, make sure you join us next month. We're going to have illustrator Simone Shin sometime in March. So keep an eye on us and we'll let you know when that's going to be. And thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Angela, for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Bye.